Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Miss Sam. I am one of the librarians here in the teen department at Levittown Public Library, and we are honored today to have Michael Smith with us, who is a registered architect, and he's going to talk to us about what it's like to be an architect. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Hi, my name's Michael Smith. I'm a principal at Smith Pucillo Architects. I graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York in 1990 with a Bachelor's of Science and a Bachelor's of Architecture. I obtained my license to practice architecture in the state of New York in 1995. So the whole process from the time I graduated high school in 1985 was about 10 years. From that point, I worked at a number of different firms around the state, finally finishing with the guy who I became a partner with, Anthony Pucillo, in New Rochelle, New York. And we worked together until his retirement in 2014. And since then, I've been running the firm on my own with my wife and a few other guys. And we primarily do institutional work, educational facilities, and libraries. So we have, a fair amount of expertise with mid-size to large-size construction projects. But lately, we've been working on smaller projects. So that's where we're at right now. Yeah.
Great. So let's start with kind of at the beginning. When you got out of high school, how did you decide that this was like, what led you into the field of architecture? What was there anything that inspired you, or what made you pick that choice?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. My dad would tell you that I always wanted to be an architect. I never knew I wanted to be an architect. So I graduated from high school. I had done a few programs in architecture through high school. Basic stuff like drawing classes and some things that introduced you to basic architectural principles. And that, got me started. So when I applied to colleges that gave me the opportunity to do architecture. But I'll be honest, I don't think I completely understood that I was going to wind up being an architect if I did that. So I kind of followed the path, and I kind of succeeded up, I suppose. So, to a certain degree, it was just following what I had done before by building on top of it. And that's how I wound up ultimately just getting through school. It's a bit of a plod to get through architecture school. It's the profession kind of insists upon a dedication time-wise. I mean, I think that there are a lot of different places you can fall in the profession, but to get through school, they expect a lot of time.
Gotcha. And then my question would be kind of like you were saying, they expect kind of a lot of time. Is there any specific degree that you have to come out of school with? Are there other educational paths if you're not really looking to go to college, or is a degree necessary? How does that work?
Well, I'm somewhat removed from the licensing process, but when I graduated from school, you had to have a Bachelor's of Architecture and 3 years of internship, or you could work for 15 years in the field and then sit for the licensing exam. They didn't actually require a Bachelor's of Architecture to get through that. I honestly never heard of anybody accomplishing that task. Now, I have worked with older guys who were probably 2 generations ahead of me. And some of those guys didn't actually go to architecture school. They may have graduated from college with a different degree and wound up working in the field. But nowadays, I think that that's probably almost unheard of. And almost everybody will have a Bachelor's of Architecture or a Master's of Architecture. Now, generally in my field, the master's degree is really limited to people who maybe go into education. That doesn't mean that it doesn't help you when you're working, but when we interview people, the bachelor's and the master's degree are virtually interchangeable for us.
Gotcha. And then I know you mentioned internships. Is that something that if somebody's interested in architecture, that they need to wait until they're in college? Is that something that they could be looking into while they're in high school? Or how does the internship process work?
Well, now that's yeah, that's a good question. The internship I'm talking about is a formal internship. And this is something that you have to keep track of your time and the different things that you work on. In order to sit for the exam, you have to prove that you've done certain things within an architect's office. You have to have certain experience before you can sit for the exam. That includes, managing construction, doing construction documents, all sorts of different things that are required just to say you're qualified to be an architect. That's completely different than, say, an internship you might get during school. So the internship that goes towards getting your license is something that has to happen after you graduate. So they don't count time before you graduate. All right. So the internship during work is informal. Architects' offices love to bring people in, but it is somewhat challenging to do meaningful work before you've gotten through school, because there are certain like basic requirements just to do the job. Most of it relates to sort of technical things such as software that we use. If you have the ability to use that, then you really can jump in at almost any time. And like my office uses AutoCAD, Revit, and AutoCAD architecture. And that's a pretty common program that's probably used by the majority of architecture offices. So if you have some sort of hands-on knowledge of how to use a program like that, you certainly can work almost immediately, like, your freshman year in college, or some even earlier, if you were willing to put up with the office environment.
Gotcha. So obviously, that's something that they could be working on now while they're still in high school. They could be looking into those different programs and kind of working up on those skills. Are there anything else that you would suggest that if somebody is interested in architecture that they could be doing in high school, like maybe drawing classes or something like that? I know you had mentioned that earlier. Any advice on that front?
Well, when I graduated from college, I was the last graduating class to get out of there without having to use a computer. It's been a little while. Now, it is important that you can draw, but it's not important that you draw like an artist. The purpose of our drawings is to communicate ideas and techniques to either to a client or to a builder. So it would be sort of the difference between somebody who writes like Shakespeare and somebody who writes a technical manual. You're not expecting the same level of proficiency there. So I'm actually a terrible drawer, but I can get my ideas across. And you practice it and you kind of get to the point where people believe that you know what you're doing. But I think that in terms of like things that are important to learn that can be done before you're really into architecture, is get into the construction trades in any way possible. If it means, painting a house, pushing a broom around a construction site, anything that can kind of teach you how buildings are built and the technical part of the experience, because it's one thing that you won't get in school. They'll pretend to do it, but until you actually work with somebody who has to make money building buildings, you're not really going to understand it.
Right. And that actually leads very nicely into my next question, was about technology. Obviously, technology has changed drastically over even just the last few years. So can you talk a little bit about, obviously, we know that now a lot of it is done on computers, well, all of it almost. So how has technology changed within your field? Do you see anything in the future that you could suggest or that you think might be coming soon?
Well, when I started, like I was saying, a lot of architecture offices were still drafting on paper. And so there was a large room filled with guys, and mostly guys, who were just drawing on paper. They would get instructions from the architect and then create the drawings that the architect wanted. These guys could make a living just being a draftsman. That job's gone, completely gone. There are large offices that will have CAD operators, but the vast majority of architecture offices, it's the It's the architects and the people who have gone through school that are now doing all the work on the computer. It has reduced the size of an office and how many people and how many employees are required to accomplish a job. My first office had 14 guys that were draftsmen and 3 architects. My office now has 6 architects and no draftsmen. So it's really changed the business a lot. Now, other things that are important in an office are communicating with the client, which is usually done in 3D models and renderings. And that's another portion of the job that sort of passed me by, but is still important to the office. We wind up using a lot of things like Photoshop and other rendering programs to communicate ideas to the owner. And sometimes we have to communicate to the public what our intentions are. So I think the biggest thing that you really have to work on is your communication skills, whether it's verbal, written, or drawing, and whether you're drawing by hand or you're drawing using the computer.
Right. And then I know you had said that your office mostly deals with institutional work and things like that. Is there a major difference between more of the institutional side of architecture compared to like residential and things like that? And how is that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. The institutional work has a bureaucracy that you have to deal with. Whether it's the state agencies, banks, or just the clients themselves, which are almost always bureaucratic in nature. So that's one aspect of it. The design portion of it and the actual work with the people is pretty similar, whether you're doing work at a public library or you're doing work on somebody's house. We find that the ability to move projects through a bureaucracy is a skill, and it is a skill that it's not something that's hard to learn, but it is frustrating. And so there are firms that just don't want to deal with that, but there are clients that need that need architects. So there's always going to be somebody out there. I prefer doing the institutional work. I really don't like the bureaucratic portion of it. But the residential work is challenging because the clients are much closer to you day to day. And that can sometimes be awkward because the taking a job from an idea to an actual building is a process. And there are going to be dead ends, and there are going to be mistakes, and there are going to be problems. And that's easier to deal with, I think, in a professional setting than it is in, say, a residential setting. I've loved the residential jobs I've done, but I find that the amount of time that it takes and the amount of money that has to be invested in it is difficult for our office to do. So it's a skill, but I don't think there's a big difference ultimately in the product that we're putting out.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's kind of move into kind of your day-to-day and kind of your working conditions. So obviously we hear about the big projects and how it's a very project focused work. But what would you say your day-to-day is typically like?
Well, it changes a lot during the course of a year. We start, if we're in a job and it's in construction, the first thing you do is you have to, first of all, our day starts earlier then, because construction starts at 7 o'clock and we kind of work construction hours then. Questions are going to be coming in. The bigger the job, the more the questions there are going to be. And one of the things that we do is we organize all of the other people in a process. When a job starts, we're bringing in the engineers, we're bringing in all the surveyors. When we get into construction, we're managing the people that are doing the building. So the first thing that happens on a day like that would be, chasing down the emails and returning phone calls, going through the drawings and explaining what our ideas were and where we want to go. Some jobs, I'll start my day actually in the field, and I'll go out to the construction site or the sites. And then it's just walking around and answering questions for the various guys that are in the field. That's my favorite part of the job. Now, the other things that can happen is while we're in production, while we're taking a job from, say, schematic design to construction documents, that's just production. It's just grinding day after day, just adding more and more information to your construction set. So the first thing we'll do is early in the week, I'll meet with the people that I'm working with, and we'll set up tasks for the coming week and benchmarks that we want to meet. And then it's the rest of the day is usually spent working. And then occasionally during the course of a day, we'll come back together to discuss what we've accomplished and whether we have questions or problems. There's a lot of time spent going back and forth with people. So while I happen to be working mostly from home right now and have been actually for a few years, people caught up with me with COVID. We still have to meet frequently during the week, the people that I'm working with. It's just some things you just can't do over the computer. So we wind up bringing drawings back and forth, meeting at somebody's house or meeting in a conference room somewhere. But that's how the day generally goes. If we're meeting with clients, that's not something that we do often. We spend a lot of time with the clients, but most of our time is really done in production or in construction management.
Right. And so actually that leads into my next question with obviously, sometimes you can be answering questions like last minute and, kind of putting out fires here and there. So do you feel that your hours for a typical day are consistent? Do they vary widely from one day to another? Are there any limitations on your personal or social life due to that, fluctuation? How does that go?
Well, when I first started, I would get to the office at about 7:30 in the morning, and I would usually leave between 5 and 6 at night. And that was a typical day. It was rare that I had to be there early, and it was rare that I had to work any later. But like I said, one of the things that happens in the field is that nobody wants to be the first guy to leave the office. Just like in school, nobody wanted to be the first guy that left studio at night. So it's almost like a fetish, this idea that you just have to keep working. And that to me is a cultural problem. And we've actually worked pretty hard to try to prevent that from happening in the office. It's unhealthy. People get miserable. And so we've really tried to encourage people to get out when they're done.
Right.
Our projects can take upwards of 3 or 4 years to go from schematic design to construction, and then another 2 or 3 years to build. So you always have to stay focused on the long game. You can't let your task for the week consume you and cost you, 6-8 months down the line. So we have to put the time in, but we also encourage people to get out, especially a day like today that's very, very sunny and nice outside. And, it's important to spend, time outside the office, but it is a time intensive job. And I answer questions on vacation. I carry my phone everywhere I go. I've put fires out while sitting on a beach.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
do what you have to do, because the other side of it is that we're small offices. Most architects in the field, like upwards of 70%, work in offices that are less than 15 people. So if you work in an office that's less than 15 people, you have to do everything, and you have to be there when the job has to be done.
Right.
On the other hand, like yesterday, I left at 2:00 and went for a walk, because I didn't have a lot to do, and I knew I could do it today. And so there is flexibility in the job. If you're willing to put the time in, if you're willing to be flexible, the job can be flexible.
That's great. And then that kind of also goes into my next thing too, is obviously you're meeting with clients, you're on the job sites, on the construction sites. So would you say that you do more work individually, or do you do more work in teams? How would you consider that?
Well, everything is done in teams. I work individually, but I'm as part of a team. We have, when we did the renovation on Levittown just now, that job had an interior designer. We had 3 full-time architects working on it and 4 interns working on it. We had 2 different engineers. We had a surveyor. We had a civil engineer, and we have a construction manager that we've worked with. everybody goes through us. So we come up with the idea of what we want to accomplish by working with the client, and then we take that idea and we pass it through to everybody else. And so everybody then comes back to us for coordination. So you have to be able to work in a team, but you also have to be able to make individual decisions. People expect you to make the decision.
Right. And obviously that goes along too with my next question is how much travel is required for your job. So I would say you're doing quite a bit of traveling because you're going to different sites. I mean,
yeah, it depends though. Bigger firms will have jobs that could be hundreds of miles away. Smaller firms typically try to stay within an hour or two of their office. It's just a practical issue. Clients aren't going to pay you your travel expenses for, say, a $2 million job. But if you're Iona College and they're paying an architect from Boston, they don't care if they pay them to fly down twice a month to meet with them. But generally, we work within right now, I think the furthest job we have is about 75 miles away.
Gotcha. So more in like a regional type of area. Gotcha. And then are there certain times of the year that you find are busier than others, or is it pretty much a steady workflow throughout the year?
When we're doing schoolwork, especially public schools, our busiest time of the year would be between September and January. We have to have our drawings done for the review by the state sometime around January, so that construction can start somewhere around June. Everybody else doesn't care, but schools care. So if we're doing a house, you generally want to start construction in March or April. But if that's not how it falls out, it's not a killer. So it's just if we have public schools that are on, if that happens, we know we're going to be busy through the fall and into the early winter.
Right. And that also goes along with too, do you find that there are certain areas or regions that are better for this particular type of career field, or is it pretty much you can live and go anywhere, or how does that work?
Well, unfortunately, you have to work where the money is. Now, I have always been in the Northeast. There's always construction almost everywhere, but the smaller the area, the smaller the number of firms that can be supported there. It's a job that requires a certain amount of affluence for people to pay for you. I know that sounds kind of snobbish, but it's not people can't afford you if they're doing a $800 deck on their house. But if you happen to live in Danbury and you're doing a $10,000 deck, spending a few $100s to get an approval from an architect is not a big deal. So generally, I would say, yeah, you can live almost anywhere, with certain caveats to that. You have to live in a place where there's work.
Right. And then that actually goes to my next question is about advancement. Are there opportunities for advancement within your career? Obviously, I know you said you worked at many different firms over, the time, and now you're, pretty much a partner in your own firm. So how does that work? How would somebody work up to, different advancement opportunities? Yeah,
well, the first thing that happens when you get out of school is you really don't know anything. So the more experience you can get, the better. The more valuable you'll be to offices. So it's very common for people when they first get out of school to bounce around a lot. I worked for 3 different architects at the same time when I got out. Now, business was bad, so nobody wanted to hire you full time. So I would work like Monday and Tuesday at one guy's office and Wednesday, Thursday at another guy's office and fill in at a third office. But the experience was important. Generally, you start and you're just part of the production team. You just do a lot of drawings and a lot of production. You follow instructions. People give you sketches. You have to convert the sketches into drawings. Then you'll move on to, say, a project management job where you're actually managing a project that's in construction, and you'll have some autonomy underneath a licensed architect, who's the project architect. And then from the project architect, you become, you might get to be a partner. Now, that can all be the same person at some point. So the person doing the drawings can be the same guy as the project architect who's the partner in the firm. Again, it comes down to how many people you have, how big a job it is, what the budget is like. But in smaller firms, you're going to be able to do more. If you get out of school, you join a small firm, they're going to throw you in and you're going to sink or swim based on how hard you're willing to work and how easily you can learn things. But you're going to do everything. They just don't have the personnel to shield you from anything. But advancement can be somewhat limited because a small firm is just going to have a number of people that are going to do labor. Bigger firms are more traditional, more corporate, and they'll move you up through advancement. And that's nice, and that there's a security there, and there's kind of an understanding of how the business world works. But the process is really just, there's not much to it. Once you're an architect, you've hit the top.
Yeah.
So the big thing is running projects to running a firm. So.
Right. And then I know you mentioned, sitting for the exam, and obviously you need to be licensed in order to become an architect. Is it just the one exam and the one license, or are there multiple things that you need to be licensed in?
I'm licensed as an architect in the state of New York, and I could get other licenses. There are organizations, private organizations that offer licenses in things such as energy efficiency. That it's mostly green building design, energy efficiency, and you can have licenses in that. There are also licenses for historic preservation. None of those are required. Those are things that you would get so that you could sell specific services and certify that you are capable of doing that. But the one thing that you have to have is just the Bachelor's of Architecture.
Right.
There's just, or not the Bachelor's of Architecture, I'm sorry, the registered architect, the license.
Right.
So without that, you have a real limit to how far you can go.
Right. And then obviously, you said you're licensed in the state of New York. So how easy or difficult is it to get licensed in other states or to move from state to state?
Yeah, I actually have licenses in 4 different states. So
Gotcha.
it's pretty easy. It's mostly a money issue. If you're willing to pay, once you get the license, most states will accept reciprocity so that you can get licenses in their states. Some states will have like funny little quirky things that you have to deal with. There is continuing education that you have to do. So I'm taking classes, probably 16, 18 hours a year. It's not a lot, but the idea is just to keep up on trends and on technology.
Right. And then kind of what would you say, if you had to say something, what would you say is the best part of your job and things that teens should know going into it, those concerns or those things that are the bigger challenges?
Well, I love building buildings. I think it's really cool to work for 5 or 6 years and then be able to point at something and say, I did that. I know every inch of that building. I know why it is the way it is. I know all the stupid things that were done in it. I know all the smart things that were done in it. I have always enjoyed that. I enjoyed it when I was a little kid. I would sneak into construction sites and do things. So I've always enjoyed that part of the job. That's not the only part of the job, but that's the part that I really enjoy. Now, the things that kind of annoy me, like I said before, the bureaucracy can be very annoying. I can't stand having to get building department approvals for stuff. I like the guys that work in building departments, but it annoys me that I have to talk to them. It just,
It's a frustrating process.
It's a frustrating part of the job. Like, it's just, you just have another person looking over your shoulder. And, we answer to a lot of different agencies and a lot of different bureaucracies. But the good thing is, it's not the only part of the job. So, you put up with it. Everybody has to do it. There's no job that's exempt from this. So you do what you have to do to accomplish the tasks that you want. So, those are the two parts of the job that really stand out. I love building things, and I can't stand having to do the paperwork. So
That's fair enough.
I know there are people who would complain about the contractors, but I kind of think they perform a magical thing. I don't know how they take my drawings and build a building out of it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And then anything that you can guess that what type of interest, abilities, or skills do you think a person would need to have in order to be successful in this career field?
Well, I don't want to like exclude certain things, but like one of the things people think is that you have to have a good technical background, and it is good to have a technical background, know how things get done, understand the process. But these are things you learn with experience. It's not something you have to be good at going into. Communication is probably the one thing you really have to work at. You have to learn how to write things. You have to learn how to read things carefully, to explain to people what your thoughts are. Is an underrated skill. That's something you can't assume people know what you're thinking. Well, in my field, I'm taking what I'm thinking and I'm actually making something with it. And you have to be able to communicate those ideas to people. And that's the biggest thing that if you can work on in school is learn how to write and learn how to communicate. Now, sort of a less specific, things that I did a lot of was history classes. Like I learned to draw. I hated it, but I learned to draw, and just traveling. So one of the things architects do a lot of is traveling to places where buildings are, and just getting to know what it means to move through things and move through space and what people do. So if you can understand how people use buildings, it kind of helps you learn how to build buildings.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess my very last question is, do you have any advice for teens that might be interested? Any last words of wisdom for teens that might be thinking about or are definitely interested in pursuing this career?
Well, don't take school too seriously, because I started school with 70 people in my first class. We graduated 15 of those people. And I would argue that most of the people that quit because they hated the school, not necessarily because they fell out with architecture. I didn't like school either. But when you get out, there's no requirement to be an architect. There are a lot of jobs that you're going to be very adept at because of the education that you get in school. If you enjoy building, if you enjoy buildings, if you enjoy the built environment and people, there's a place for you. And I don't think that you should be scared of school. They weed kids out, and I think they do it on purpose, and I wish they wouldn't. When you get out into the real world and you get a job, it's hard enough. I just think that when they do it in school, it's just a shame, because the education is enough. It'll get you places. Because I know a lot of guys that I graduated with, and they work for construction management firms. They work for engineering companies. They work in building departments. Very few people that I graduated with wind up actually becoming architects.
Yeah, so there's many different fields that you can go into with that education.
Right. Anything that kind of can take you from the design portion all the way out to running a building, managing a building, is something that architects are good at.
So I wanted to say thank you very much to Michael Smith for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.